a biblical sexual ethic, and you mentioned this briefly, but for someone who's single, not married, what is their, like, because a lot of the language and even in our conversation has been around the idea of like, us in our marriages and sex, but for a single person who's like, well, I'm not married and I know I'm not supposed to have sex, but how do they approach this?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is get the lie out of your head that marriage doesn't require denial, because it does. And we've already talked about that. And, we can come into that relationship still being fueled by our lust and by our flesh, so the act of getting married doesn't exclude you from having to deny yourself in regards to your sexuality. Yes. So don't look at us and say, oh, they don't have to sacrifice, they've got it so easy. We don't. Like we still have to deny all of this. The other thing, and this is going to get into a little bit of the meat of theology of the body, but God has designed sex to be a picture, an icon of his covenant love for us. And so we, as married people, get to engage in that. We get a foretaste of what that union will be like in heaven when there's no separation between us and God. What singles get to focus on, so while married people are focusing on the picture of heaven and that consummation, singles get to participate in that here and now. So, New Testament, Paul talks about, it's better if you don't get married. Married life brings a lot of distraction and a lot of things that you have to focus on outside of, Christ and his church, just the regular day-to-days. And so as singles, you have the opportunity to really go all in on like the bride of Christ, and you get to live what we are imaging in our sexual intimacy. You get to live that in the here and now, and you get to focus on that alone. And so, it's hard because we live in this culture of, immediate gratification. But I do believe that this message offers something compelling to singles who, are waiting or maybe have decided, marriage is not for them. It offers them something to focus on, in the here and now. Yeah.
That's good. And I think that would be, the real test of this, because if we're going to talk about this foundational understanding, then it needs to be able to say something to the singles. Yeah. Right? Yeah. To say like, hey, you can experience, maybe not in the expression that you were talking about as a married person, but the intimacy that Jesus wants to have with us. The fact that he chose that language of him being the groom and we, the church, being the bride. Like there's something in that we can actually experience, and it actually satisfies us. Yeah. It's fulfilling.
Yeah. And I think another thing I would say is just the longings that you feel are good, and they have been placed there by a God who loves you and who has a very specific purpose for that. And you might not have an outlet for, and I'm talking about sexual longing here. You might not have an outlet for that, but if you can allow yourself to direct those desires back to God, like that's the ultimate purpose there. And, those sexual longings, they aren't satisfied by anything here on earth, and it's all meant to point us back to God. So, don't fight it. Am I allowed to say that? I mean, don't engage it in ways that aren't biblical and honoring to God, but, don't despise those longings because they have been placed there by your Creator who loves you and who just longs for relationship with you. And so, use those as a tool to kind of propel you into deeper intimacy with your Heavenly Father.
That's so good. And the discipling aspect of that is to recognize the desire is from God, and we have to, as individuals, understand how much that desire has been discipled by the culture, and be mindful of that. And there are rhythms, and there's disciplines, and there's things that we can do to help not inundate and consume all of that, but also there's rhythms and disciplines that we can do as followers of Jesus to ensure that those desires are in line with this idea of holy sexuality.